Welcome to the iSquare webinar series. Now we are in the new normality, which is also a name for that. In the last month, we were still dealing within the Corona experience, and now we will set aside to kind of convey you the characteristics of the new normality, how it is like. And it's my pleasure. I'm Michael Schießl. I'm a psychologist. I'm with the iSquare team. It's my great and utmost pleasure that I could introduce you two friends and colleagues. First of all, it's Jan-Philipp Görtz. You could also call him JP. So JP is a former director of government relations at Lufthansa. He was involved in a lot of crisis management. It started with the fallout of 9/11. He saw a lot of crisis with Lufthansa, so he's an expert on that. His background is law, so he's a lawyer. He has an MA in international relations, and he will somehow guide us through that. It's my second great pleasure to welcome our dearest friend, Willi Schroll. Willi Schroll, he's devoted to foresighting. So he's an information scientist. And since 1995, his company, strategiclabs, is doing professional, corporate, and public foresighting. They are helping companies to identify opportunities and find future-proof strategy. He specializes in emerging technologies, disruptive innovations, and their impact in business and society. So glad that you're here. You will guide us through this webinar. As always, you, the audience, you could raise questions, use the chat function, and so this is our pleasure. I have the burden and the pleasure to give you a very brief intro where we are coming from. With the start of this crisis at iSquare, we kind of founded the Corona Experience Center, which is a series of empirical measurements and of theory work where we try to understand the things which are going on better. Now we are here on this slide where we could see the 4 different stages. And maybe the next one, maybe one more. Maybe one more slide. Yeah, this is the four-stage model. The crisis started with the so-called turmoil. That was the initial terror and death-related impulse. Then we went into the regression. 4th stage we call hyperstrength, and then we are going into the neo-normality. We just recently have done another measurement in Germany. Maybe we could have a look on the next slide. This is the current situation. Next week, Julian Seufert and Dr. Matthias Rotensee, also here in the webinar, will give you more insights and data about this model. I just want to make things brief here. So these are 4 psychological stages. Now the stage of hyperstrength is prevalent. We've done a factor analysis model with that. About 65% of the respondents kind of fall into this stage. It is a new stage. It is a new orientation. It is concerned with the inner archetype of the hero. It has a lot of opportunities and a lot of questions. And then we will go into the stage of neo-normality. That's it from my side. So I'll leave it to JP and Willi, and thanks everybody who's here in this webinar.
Thank you, Michael. Can you now see me or the slides? Because I am actually steering the slides, and that's more difficult than flying a jumbo jet. Just to be aware, well, thank you. Hello from Berlin. Thank you for having me here on the show. Yes, as Michael has said, personally, I have worked through quite a few crises, starting with 9/11 and then finishing up with probably the golden piece, unfortunately, the Germanwings accident. So, but all the crises that I have worked through really paled in comparison to what we see now, because what we see now is a prolonged global crisis that affects basically all sectors of society and economy worldwide. So it's certainly something that warrants at least one seminar, a webinar. And I'm glad that we can now talk about what the world afterwards will look like. Willi, after me, will, he's the mad scientist. So he is going to take us through trends and scenarios. I worked mostly with tools of strategic communication. And so to me, principles and fundamental things and ideas are important because those are the things that I want to carry to my interlocutors. And that's why I will take a look at some principles and not take up so much of Willi's time. Principles, I think that will be true in the new normality, or should I say remain true. And that's actually already my first point. Point number one is the new normality does not mean nothing will be the same or everything will change. I think that's something that we hear a lot. Nothing will be the same, everything will change. And that's not true. Actually, everything will just be reassembled and it will get a new order. Almost everything will be the same. However, some of the value that we attach to different things and on which we spend time and money will change in the preference of people, and therefore some things will sink, some things will come afloat. Probably most of the things that you already that will happen, you already know that they are already part of our lives. They're just not as big a part. So I think that that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I've really seen bad breakdowns of aviation and everything, but then things come back. They come back in a different way. Maybe the low-cost carriers are a consequence also of 9/11 and whatever changed after that. But basically, things just get a new order. So to get into that new order, often it's already a desired state of affairs, but the old normality keeps us back. And for me, when I left Lufthansa, it was a decision that was very tough because I wanted to do some new things, like sit in webinars with you, and I couldn't do that then. And so it was a conscious decision that I had to make with breaking the old order in my life. But sometimes a good crisis comes to help you to establish what you've always wanted to do. And I think it's important to look at crisis as a twofold phenomenon. When I wrote speeches for Lufthansa CEOs, I think almost every second year we had a crisis, and I would write into their speeches or into their speaking points words like, crisis in Chinese has two signs, and they stand for danger and opportunity. And I think we're all aware of the dangers because danger is supposed to warn us and it affects us more directly. But let's not forget about the opportunities. Opportunities are there and they're there for everybody. And even though it sounds like self-explanatory thing, keep in mind that there is a lot of opportunity out there. So a new order and opportunity, those are things that I wanted to feature before I go and try to look at the next slide in the presentation. Exactly. My third point is empathy. Try to understand the experience of people around you as well as you can. When I was with Lufthansa, we didn't have I-Square, and we didn't have their sort of experience and knowledge in really finding out what other people experience. But we still made a really good account of the interest, the professional and the personal interests of our opponents and of the interlocutors in politics and regulators that we needed to speak to. So we were aware of their interests. I think basically what you will want to do, depending on the business you're in, you will want to understand your users and your consumers. And I'm very fascinated by what you're doing at I2. Do you see the screen now, actually, my screen? Yeah, good. Because this is the three level or layer system that they have developed at I2. And I took that out of the webinar you did last week on System 0, the mere perception. And it really has helped me to understand better what people actually go through and what they experience. And just quickly on the System 0, we have perception. That is basically the BIOS. So that is the thing that is a very high performance perceptive system that goes through and computes really millions of impressions every second. A lot of that is being fed directly into the System 1, the emotional, the subconscious system. Is also a very fast processor. And then we have the System 2, which is the explicit, the cognitive system, which is really everything you can talk about, your consciousness. And we, I think, have to realize that all these systems have been affected by the Corona experience. We have, here we have, basically we have very strong symbols that have hit our perception. When you talk with people about Corona, what they can actually talk about, they talk about pictures and images that they saw from Italy or from China or from New York City. It's graves, masks, and coffins. So, and that has gone straight into the implicit system. It has gone into the subconscious, has created fear for their own lives, that images like that would happen in their own neighborhood or in Germany, and we haven't seen that. But we saw that from somewhere else. In 2.5 seconds, it's already down in our subconscious. And then through the days and weeks, it goes up into our cognitive system, which of course tries to make order of it. And this order is very important for us. It's very difficult because we have this, what I would call a nervous breakdown in System 2. We have too much information. We have contradictory information. We have news and fake news, and we have experts who say this and that. And so we feel basically a tingle in the fingers. I feel it sometimes that I might be missing the important information. So there's an infection or an affection, however, on all systems. And I think that is important if we want to understand what we have to do and what a new normality has to look like. It basically has to cure, or it has to heal all these three infections. And what I would suggest is that this can be done using tools or using communication in a way that, again, addresses all three systems. One, of course, we need on the BIOS, we will ultimately need medicamentation or a vaccine that will help put people at ease. But we also need positive symbols and images. We need handshakes, for example. We need people close to each other because that's something we desire, and that is something that stands for normal. It's not normal for us to have empty spaces with people wearing masks. So sooner or later, we need to find positive symbols of hope and the rising sun or the rainbow and things like that. That will lead us to a new normality because it will affect our System 1 and the System 2. It will affect our emotions. We need trust. I think that's a crucial element that we need to rebuild with clear communication, calm communication. We need to put our action where our words are. So action is important, and keeping and creating relationships. And for the cognitive system, I think that the language must be clear. I think silence is also a very important thing that we need to remind ourselves of for ourselves. So these are the three I think, measures that can be taken in order to put into the human experience the hope that is the basis for a future, and that is the basis for neo-normality. So these are all, you could say, standard things, but I found it important to stress that again, because actually what I do now is I have an academy for applied philosophy, and of course philosophy is also a lot of crazy words, but it needs to boil down to simple principles that we can remember. And what is our new normality built on? It is built on order, meaning nothing will be the same, but most things will be the same, but the order of things changes. So we need to order things and thoughts. We need to look at the opportunities, which will put our focus on the positives of the situation. And we need empathy. And I introduced you to the 3-level system here by I2 to understand there's perception, there's subconscious, implicit, and there's the explicit cognitive. And actually we'll be doing a conference in September with our academy, VALERE. We will maybe have the I2 study circle or ethos circle, if Michael brings them in, to a conference on trust. And to just, to refocus again on these things. So that's my take from strategic communications and crisis experience, 20 years, really, really a lot of stuff. And now I give the floor to Willi, so that Willi can take us into the high spheres of information science.
Thank you so much, JP. And I hope I see the next slide in a moment. Now we totally changed the perspective because we zoom out from all this. Think about being 10,000 miles above, yes? And this is not the next, but there should be one before. No.
No.
So no, it's really lacking now. That's a problem. So I will speak anyway, and we will keep this slide just as it is. And what you would have seen, is the huge complexity of Foresight. Yeah. So what has happened actually is that a tiny virus has hit the planet Earth like a huge comet. And this event has an impact on all scales and in all sectors of life, from society to economy and so on. And obviously it's not, for God's sake, it's not a killer virus, but the counted cases as of today are at least 5 million infected and casualties of 30 to 150,000 attributed deaths. So this is actually no fun. And compared with historical pandemics, other diseases or people dying by poverty, etc., these are still rather low figures. But the load on the economy and the whole society is really outstanding, as all we know. And how is that? Since the systems of society and politics are globally responding to the threat with a huge plethora of measures. Now, why is that? Since we want to prevent the high costs of life and health, which are looming when the pandemic is not controlled. Think, for instance, of the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, 1919, which infected 500 million. That is a third of the world population at that time. And the death toll of estimated between 17 and 15 million. And so the concern is really understandable. Now the question is, why the perspective of Foresight here? What is interesting in this endeavor? You need sustainable strategies, of course, in such a complex situation. And you have to understand all the context, not only 2, 3, or 4 contexts. You need really the big picture to create a solid base for your sustainable strategy in this situation. Generally speaking, we are all caring for our individual and collective future. This means institutions like government, insurances, public administration, and think tanks have always constantly to analyze trends and events to understand possible scenarios. But also you do it on your individual level. In short, one only can be prepared for scenarios that one knows. You have to know the scenario which might come to reality. To create forecasts and scenarios, the Foresight people collect data and models from all kinds of sectors and sources. Today, this is extremely data-driven compared with earlier generations, where there was a lot of speculation, but of course with a load of complexity, as you see in this slide. You understand there are really methodological problems to understand what are the key drivers and on which to focus. And the first slide, we actually have not here now, would show from the World Economic Forum the landscape of global risks and the connections of all these risks. Yeah. And this is actually immense, and pandemics are always on our screen, on our radar screen, but it's only one of maybe 2 dozens of other huge risks on a global scale. And when we now see on this slide, our zoom in on the COVID-19 event, you have a kind of impact mapping with the 8 nodes to the left side. You see the COVID-19 as a central node and the 8 sub-nodes which have been understood as being highly relevant in this crisis by the World Economic Forum. But of course, other groups or collectives of experts might change it from the beginning, or might change it from week to week or from month to month. What is actually relevant? Because as we see on a personal level, of course, on the collective and institutional levels, the reaction to crisis, the crisis response and adaptation also are in stages. And as an example, I have highlighted here to the left of the node the impact on trade. And so you see the logic of this tool of the World Economic Forum with the connected nodes, which you probably cannot read on your screen because they are so much that the font size is so tiny. And as an example, I have taken here to the right of the left image with a red marker the example of retail, consumer goods and lifestyle, because it's very close to the consumer experience topics. And then you see that in this crisis, this 8 nodes, which comprise of the media, the government response, the workforce impact, think of home office discussion, or the impact on travel or on financial markets, or finding a vaccine. There are a lot of other sub-nodes which are so related to all this, and so it's difficult to find a clear path even to scenarios or to criteria to find scenarios. And though on the top right of this slide, you see this ranking chart of the most likely fallouts for the world, I hope you can read it. I will just read the first 3. The prolonged recession of the global economy is on top in likelihood. We in Foresight like to categorize in all this complexity at least in 5 or 6 basic categories, like society, economy, ecology, technology, politics, or short, to have another sequence, STEEP. Yeah? And what you see are these blue marked topics, like the prolonged recession, the surge in bankruptcies, and the failure of industries or sectors. And in the top 10, you have a lot of blue. This means they are all related to the economy, of course. And despite of this, we have to realize, not despite, sorry for that, as an example, as an illustration of the severity of the impact onto the economy, I have three strong figures. As World Economic Forum is estimating. About the possible world states, they say there might be 500 million people at risk of falling into poverty because of this. 500 million is 500 million. 3% are expected to drop in, 3% is the expected drop in the world output, yeah, on the GDP. And then you have 13 to 32% anticipated fall in the global trade. And this means because we have lean management, we have lean logistics, we have lean production, you know, we have, take example, Amazon, etc. We have such fantastic smart supply chains. This, on the other hand, means kind of vulnerability when the global trade is shrinking 13 to 32%, for instance, because there are dependent industries which might suffer from this. And you see the majority of these blue items just shows that in the beginning of the crisis, it was all about, of course, your existential threat of life and death, of your health, of dying in a very bad state and in solitude. And now, as many research shows, it has shifted, that the concern has shifted into the concern about the economic state, as of course you can also read in all the media. And this is, to sum it up, about economical well-being in general, which is in many psychological models, of course, close behind the basic needs like safety, food, etc. And actually, you know, regions of the world really suffer in a way that people have to stand in a queue just to get food now. And now, please, let's have a look on the next slide about this crisis adaptation, which comes, yeah, of course, in waves. Also on a systemic level, on a global level, institutional level, on the collectives, but with highly dynamics therein. And to explain it shortly, it's of course not a very consistent graph, because it's just showing the research fields or innovation fields or activity fields, mixed with, in the center, the emotional nodes or complexes we, of course, already heard about today, like fear, distrust, anger, stress, and confusion. And you have kind of a ring of challenges, or a challenges sphere, like the concern about the health system capacity, as you see in the domain of politics. Yeah, you see here the 5 sectors of society, technology, ecology, economy, and politics, and with a little color code. And so you see all the things which are discussed in hot debates sometimes in the challenge sphere, and in an extra ring you see the solution sphere, like having a hope into technology, like having the vaccine. I don't know whether you can see the hashtags I have grouped around all this. We had a debate about masks, about protection utilities, now about the apps, tracing apps in Germany, for instance, is a big issue. And of course, using digital readiness in the situation, or the debate about, are we ready for this, or is it a shame what's going on to switching to digital homeschooling, for instance. This is also a big debate, as you know. Or to the upper left, you see the complex of homeschooling, female work, inequality. These are all topics which now actually are very volatile and change from week to week, or sometimes day to day, as you know, and are regionally highly differentiated. It's not evenly distributed, of course. When you're a developing country, you have different concerns about all this, and you have a different challenge sphere, and you have a different solution sphere because of your limited resources, to say it short. What all the world is talking about is, of course, that the ecology sphere is relaxing a bit, and we might even get our millennial goals in this direction solved, like having less CO2 emissions. But if you go back to more normality in production, in transport, etc., this might change rather suddenly. And so many people on the societal sphere, in the discourse field, are projecting on this crisis to have big chances to transform society, even the whole world, to bring, for instance, these goals of sustainable economies more into onto the track. And on the other hand, just to name an example here, on the sphere of politics, you have this polarization issue, have this people confused about what's fact, what's real. We have, for God's sake, not seen some deep fake videos for now, because the technology is here to have deep fake videos, which might bring a lot of turmoil again into even huge collectives. And also my summary on this, you can see on the next slide, is that the neo-normality is actually very fragile, as long as all these measurements, which are often not synchronized and coordinated, cannot fully outweigh the imminent perceived threats and all the deep emotions and fears which are involved. So on this stage of the crisis, I perceive it as a very open situation, and not to be too fast to talk about neo-normality. I've seen a lot of colleagues of mine writing some articles about post-Corona age and so, but maybe we are quite in a distance from this. And so we see our last slide about some takeaways for the customer experience world, which are very ad hoc and not really based on some scrutiny in research. But I think it's very clear that we not only have new needs, like looking for breaking a situation of isolation of the elderly as an example, but we also have new skills. We have acquired, or at least some early adopters have acquired new skills, have this hyper strength, have new habits, have new patterns of behavior, actually changed, some of them at least, I suppose, their values, shifted their values, and we have totally new situations, which is important for the experience as a customer, as same as a citizen in the political sphere. One of the new situations is, of course, to be always aware about all these buzzwords like social distancing, having protection, having travel restrictions, and all this. Yeah, that's rather trivial, but in the domain of, for instance, shops, you can do a lot to bring people some comfort in this hardship with really delivering safety. This is the first thing you can see, a safety up. It's, of course, must not be the priority, because there are a lot of other values to balance. Then you have to enable resilience. You have to think allocentric. For instance, if you design new situations, you know this from design thinking, that user-centric design is a default. And now you have be much more allocentric in your thinking from the user's or buyer's perspective much more deeply. You have to symbolize the continuity instead of bringing nervosity into your products or portfolio maybe. You have also to keep your brand up like it was ever before maybe, and have on the right feature of the product or the service, have an extra which shows that you are aware of the new situation. And of course, be very consistent in your communication. So in the end, you can stabilize trust, which might be the real central resource. So thank you for this.
Well, thank you, Willi. I think I didn't promise too much when I said that he could also probably have invented Spaceship Enterprise, and thank you for landing here. Delving into risk assessment, global risks, and I always had to prepare the Davos meetings from the Lufthansa side, and I was involved in the working groups there that actually came up with these huge reports, and they've gotten more and more complex over the years. It's like taking a swim in the ocean. And of course, that's not something that we can usually do and that we can do all the time. I think it's very useful to broaden the perspective, to just see what is out there, and then to go back to your swimming pool. Of course, the best thing is to have a swimming pool with waves and ocean water. And that's why it's important to bring in that wave from the ocean of human possibilities from time to time. But it's also totally legitimate. And I think it's also a right thing to do, is to take some relief of the ocean and not always bring it in, because it would mean total overflow. And that's what I meant with the nervous breakdown syndrome, because you could go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's not what everybody of us to do. Thank you, Willi, for being at the forefront in projects. You told me in the preparation where you send around, or somebody else sends around 700 PDF files as sort of documentation. It makes you mad. It's like somebody tells you to read the internet for a project, which is just impossible. And so we all have to limit ourselves, and limits help us to create order. And I think it's very admirable what kind of limits you set yourself, even in order to order some things for us. And this, of course, will be recorded, this webinar, and you can also take a look again at the slides then. Also, the World Economic Forum, of course, has the risk report to be downloaded. That's something, if you want to have your own thriller to read by the bedside. Willi's website is strategiclabs.com. .de, sorry, strategiclabs.de. That's where you can get more of his thinking. I think it's fantastic that we can come together here with all these different specialties and different focus length, from the global scale to, I'm more a person who's worked at large DAX 30 level, all the way down to really asking real people, and the things that you do here at I-Square. You're really in contact with real people. You're not in bird's eye view, but we can provide all that range here. And if there are any questions, I'd be pleased to entertain them. Also, of course, if you want to write in if you want to write in, then you can send us your questions. We'll be glad to be in contact with you. Otherwise, my experience from most webinars is that people are not deeply involved and now just beaming with questions. It's just that and I hope you did take something away from it. What I mean is the order, the importance of empathy, the 3 levels, and what Willi talked about, and the new ideas, what a consumer experience might have to look like in the future. So if there's not any questions, I would give it back to Michael, actually, who would probably want to invite you for next week's presentation. Michael.
Yeah, thanks again for this great talk. It was very, very interesting, and I appreciate very much the combination here of the macro and of the micro perspective. Yes, so it is again next week. Dr. Rotensee and Julian Seifert will talk about the next wave of the Korona study. That's up to come. If there are no more questions, it's my pleasure here as the host to say thank you again to both of you, my dearest JP, my dearest Willi. It was very full of insights, full of passion, and helped me to understand things better, which is of the highest importance now. And thanks for the audience. Stay healthy, keep tuned. Bye bye, yours, Michael.
Bye bye.
Thank you.